Is there a strategy that'll help you grow your company faster? CEO Sales Strategies is an investigative business podcast for entrepreneurial people who never stop asking questions. Highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert Doug C. Brown interviews CEOs, business owners, and professionals who serve them to uncover and share actionable tips and methods behind their bulletproof sales strategies. Topics covered on the show include their failures, struggles, secrets, and processes that help them succeed in selling millions to billions of dollars of their products and services, all with the sole aim of helping you grow your business. If you are eager to know the most effective sales secrets from the A players of the game, then the CEO Sales Strategies podcast is certainly the place to be.
Hey everyone, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. I got a great guest for you today. Her name is Claire Chandler. She's at clairechandler.net. She's going to tell you what she does in the beginning of this. But we are talking about how to align a high-performing sales team, how you can create one, what you should and shouldn't do, and how you link strategy, clarity, and process and application to this. So without further ado, let's go talk to Claire. Claire, welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
It's great to be here, Doug. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here because we're doing something on one of my favorite subjects about how to build an aligned high-performance sales team. And you're an expert at doing this and linking leadership strategy and people to it. So why don't we jump right in? Before we go, why don't you tell people what you do, Claire, so everybody's kind of set and informed?
Sure, absolutely. So I kind of call myself a leadership therapist, and I'm not a licensed therapist, although I play one in corporate America. But I really focus on, I spent the majority of my earlier career in corporate, and now I serve as an executive leadership advisor to companies and to executives in startup and growing companies, as well as in established, mature organizations. Primarily through an HR lens. I do have a background in HR from my corporate days, but really through that higher lens of getting leaders and their teams to work together more effectively in less time and with less cultural resistance so that they can accelerate their growth journey.
Thank you. And she's found at Claire Chandler, CHANDLER.net. And those of you who planned on having some business therapy this week and paying for it, thank goodness you don't have to because you're listening to this. So
exactly right.
So let's talk about, everyone seems to have their own definition of what is a high-performing sales team, like a high-performing team in general, but high-performing sales teams. I'll talk to some owners and they're like, oh, these are people who can just close like a freight train, right? And then they'll talk to others that are like, these people can prospect like an army going to battle. There's all of these things. What's your definition of a high-performing sales team?
So for me, the key term there is team. Right? Because I think too often, especially with sales folks, and I'm going to pick on sales folks for a second because I know that they're listening. So perk up your ears. The problem with a lot of organizations that either hire a sales force or are built primarily to be a sales force is they go out and they recruit the rock stars, right? And I know probably people are thinking, well, isn't that what we want? We want these individual rock stars. The problem is, if they can't work together with either their fellow sales folks or, God forbid, the people who have to implement and deliver on what they have sold, then they are set up for failure. I've seen a lot of companies, especially the smaller ones, for reasons that I can go into, but especially the smaller ones who make the mistake of saying, I've got to get the sales force right. So I'm going to go out and hire rock stars, the ones who can close deals, who can prospect like nothing, like all those different definitions you touched upon. And they bring them into their organization. And not only do they fail, but they bring the organization to their knees because they don't know how to work as a team. To me, that is the number one metric is, can they bring in deals that are aligned with what the team can deliver and are aligned with where the company is trying to grow?
And if not, we're going to see a lot of traumatic events happen within that organization. That's what I'm hearing.
Hugely traumatic. And especially, like I said, in smaller organizations. It's been my experience that the ripple effect of a bad hire, a bad decision, a bad investment, or even a delayed decision is greater in a smaller organization than in a large one, right? And I'm sure you kind of intuitively get that. The bigger organizations are built to have a little bit of fat, and they can absorb, a one-off bad hire, a bad decision, a bad investment. A smaller company, a startup, somebody who is hiring their very first person, their very first sales team, et cetera. It is so mission critical that they get that right, because getting it wrong can literally knock you out of business.
Now, I'm going to go on the other side of this and say that it's not always the salesperson, but it actually is the leadership of the company who made the bad hire. I've experienced this just recently, right, where somebody hired a sales team. I told them I don't think they're ready for a sales team. They weren't set up for a sales team, but they went forth and did it anyways. It's a smaller company, as you're talking about. And it created so much disruption and infighting within the business that they got to actually pull the sales team out of there, because it just isn't going to work. But the executive team isn't showing up, right? They're not training the team. They're not giving the team what they need. So by nature, high performer sales people, and certainly sales teams, if they don't have the answers, they want to make money. So they're going to make it up as they go along if they don't have the information given to them readily or at all in this case. So yeah. I'd love to hear your response on that one. Is it always the sales team, or is it also the leadership?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. It starts with the leadership. For those of your audience, and I know for me personally, I do my own sales. I do my own marketing. If I am not, or in times when I am not crystal clear on who it is that I want to work with, what it is that I want to help them solve, I find that my sales suffer from that, right? I'm not having as dialed in of conversations, or my marketing is off target, or I'm attracting good payers but bad clients. So now when you amplify that and you say, I'm going to build a sales team around me, I think you're 100% right. If the leadership that brings that team in is either not crystal clear on what they want them to sell, how they want them to sell, or what successful looks like, what's the ideal client, what's the ideal deal terms, how are we going to bring that in, how are we going to execute on what we've promised, it absolutely starts with leadership. So I like to blame the leaders because they have the most power to change what they're doing and to be more directly involved in clarifying expectations.
Yeah, and I'll go back now at the sales team itself, because there are situations where people are hired. They're hiring the wrong person, or they're hiring a team of people, and that one person on the team isn't in sync with the other people, and havoc ensues. The worst I've ever seen was they had one salesperson that was taking down the company, basically, on the team. Best friend of the CEO. It was a $50 million company. And I went to the CEO and I said, you got to remove this person. And he absolutely refused. And so,
isn't that a fun conversation when you have to be the guy to go tell him that you gotta fire your buddy? Yeah, that's fun times. Yep.
Well, the only way he agreed is I showed him the metrics, and he had an 82% turnover of his employee base every year. And the majority of people said, it's this guy. That's why I left. Right. So I think it's coming, I can only imagine the hate mail I'm going to get, or the hate post I'm going to get off this conversation. But the reality is, when we have a bad seed in any part of a sales team, we've got to remove that seed, or the rest of the crop is not going to grow up healthy. I mean, it's just the way it is. Because what I've seen, and Claire, maybe you've seen this too, but I've seen when we get somebody in there like that, the person who will never pass the ball, never, pass the puck in hockey, right, to the other players. what ends up happening is the other team members, they kind of cut back on working. And they'll isolate themselves. So they'll isolate this whole process, and then they kind of go to the minimum acceptable, performance, if you will. And so what ends up happening is the whole overall sales of the organization suffers, and now they've got some other money troubles that are going through, forward.
Yeah. You mentioned hockey. I come from a hockey family, and I'm a big fan of the movie Miracle, which is, the story of the 1980 U.S. men's hockey team.
Yep.
And there's a line in there from Kurt Russell, who plays the legendary coach Herb Brooks, when he's looking at the players he wants to assemble onto this team in pursuit of the Olympic gold. And he said, "I'm not looking for the best players. I'm looking for the right ones." And that always stuck with me. And I draw upon that quite a bit when I work with leadership teams and just teams in general. It's not about assembling the individual rock stars and putting them on the same team and then being shocked when they don't get along, when they don't collaborate, when they don't know, to your analogy, how to pass the puck,
right.
How to share the victory and also share the accountability when the numbers aren't there. And I think that's such an important mantra for leaders of any function, but especially for sales teams.
So we've established, hey, that doesn't work, right? By doing that. So how do we go about the next step of that? How do we link strategy with that? Let's say that we agree, hey, we're not going to do that, but we agree. And now we need to kind of link strategy and process to that. What's the next step?
Yeah. So the first one is to actually have a strategy, right? And that feels sort of obvious, but there are a lot of organizations that just say, okay, we need to grow, we need to scale, and therefore we're going to have a sales team, and they're going to go out and they're going to get us new business.
Yep.
And as I'm sure has been your experience even more than mine, when you do that and you sort of, pardon me, go off half-cocked, and you assemble a team for the wrong reasons, or at least you don't clarify what their focus needs to be, you are setting your money on fire, and not in a good way. You're not blazing the trail. You're burning the house down. So the very first thing is absolutely around, even before you build out your strategy, is getting really, really clear on what it is that you're going to be all about. This is as true for you adding a sales team or adding a salesperson as it is for any leader of any company. If you are not crystal clear about what you are in business to accomplish, you're not going to be able to envision or map out a strategy that is going to get you closer to that goal. You're just not. So the strategy piece is absolutely imperative. But before you even go to that step, you've got to be crystal clear on what it is you are trying to accomplish in the first place. And the other thing too is, and this goes back to your point. And again, I'm agreeing with you that from the highest leadership levels, there has to be that clarity. If there is a leadership team, there has to be alignment across the board. Another pet peeve of mine it is when companies, I'll have executives kind of call me up and say, I can't get my team, fill in the blanks, my sales team, my leadership team, my operations team to collaborate. And I always say the same thing. I say, how do you incentivize them? And they say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, are you incentivizing them based on their achievement of shared goals or on individual targets? Mm-hmm. And then there's always that silence right after I ask the question, because they know the answer to that, right? They incentivize them based on their vertical, their function, their region, their division, their sales pipeline, whatever. And while that's important for simplicity's sake, you can't then turn around and wonder why they're not going to collaborate. If you don't incentivize them to collaborate, they're going to focus on what gets rewarded. So if you truly want them to collaborate, and back to, being really granular about the sales team, if you want them to function better, you have to incentivize them around shared goals.
We're speaking with Claire Chandler. It's clairechandler.net. I love that. Shared goals, shared compensation on some level. Doesn't mean we can't have some level.
Doesn't have to be 100%. Yeah.
And you talked about first, before you get into the strategy side, you talked about getting crystal clear on the outcomes, right? Of what we want.
Yep.
I have found that organizations, businesses, sometimes it's my own, I'm not perfect. You got a couple of companies, and sometimes it's like, okay, what's the truthful place we want to go versus, hey, we want to double sales this quarter or whatever, right? How do you get people, what's kind of a step or a process so somebody can get clarity in that, I'll call it the vision, but be truthful versus honest, honest being subjective, truthful being, objective, right?
Yeah. So I love that you went there, because I think this is another sort of pitfall of a lot of organizations. They have these really ambitious visions and objectives and outcomes they want to achieve over the next, 5 years. Pre-COVID, everybody was doing 20-year strategic plans, you remember? Right. And now it's like, okay, that was unrealistic before we had a global pandemic. And now it's like just completely not foreseeable. So now they're doing 5-year plans. And that's great. But I love where you're going with this conversation, because I think it is so important that organizations are, and I appreciate your distinction between being honest and being truthful. Because I do think truthfully, honesty is subjective, right? So good call out there, but they have to be truthful about their starting point, about their current state. There are, when I work with organizations, there are some diagnostics that we can use to sort of capture what is truly current state, based on several different dimensions. But I think that is also very critical. You've got to set the vision. You've got to be crystal clear about what you're in business to accomplish. You have to start to, sort of identify what does success look like on that longer term horizon. But before you take your first step, you have to know what your foundation is. You have to know really where are you starting from. I was hired to come in and do a strategic planning session with a team not too long ago. And by the time we actually got together in a room, their starting point had actually backslid. So they had booked me about 3 months before that. I got in there and they had lost a key account. And so now their 5-year outcomes hadn't changed, but their starting point had. And we couldn't start with, everybody wants to start with the fun stuff. What are we going to do when we get there? Okay, slow down, hotshot. First, you have to understand where you're starting from, because you have to build in near-term priorities that are going to get you closer. Everybody wants to celebrate getting to Mars, right? Everybody wants to be part of that celebration. Not everybody is prepared to do the work it requires to build up the discipline, to build up the systems and the processes, and to assemble the right team to get you there.
I found that people also, I call them strategic objectives. They don't build in plan A, plan B, plan C in their clarity as well. So let's say we want to go to Mars, but I don't know, we get thrown off, the gravitational force or whatever throws us this way, right? Where's the nearest planet we could land and still be, doing pretty well, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's why these near-term, missions are about setting up a base camp on the moon, because the moon is, I don't know, something like 1,000 times closer to Earth than Mars. And it has a very similar environment. And so, it's not about going back to the moon just to say, well, it's been a while since we've been on the moon. Let's go see if anything's changed. It's because people know, really smart scientists know, that the environment is similar enough that they can try and fail and innovate and evolve faster and less expensively on the moon than just taking their shot to Mars.
That makes total sense. And so for you CEOs and business owners, and even your sales, people who are sales oriented only, when you're building out a plan, have some strategic objectives in there, have some, top goals, mid goals. And if this happens, these type of goals to make sure that you're hitting your numbers. And I see so many people not doing that. And then they panic, Claire. And what they typically do when they panic is they start changing personnel, right?
Yes. Well, and it's funny, kind of going back to that point you made. I've written a few books, but the first one I wrote was called The Whirlpool Effect. And I kind of talk about this notion where if there's a lot of turnover, so you mentioned this one person who had an 82% turnover.
That was insane.
Yeah. And a lot of executives kind of keep their head in the sand, right? And they say, well, clearly we're not hiring the right people. And it's not necessarily that you've hired the wrong people, but you may be hiring them in the wrong way. If you're not looking at the leadership impact on that, right? It's the reason you do exit surveys. It's the reason that you look at your turnover metrics to say, is this a system-wide problem, or is this an isolated area that we can kind of fine tune? But if you're not looking at leadership, and if leadership's not taking ownership for their contribution or lack thereof to retention of the right people, you've got to fix that.
And do we start by looking at a crystal clear, end goal for that too? This is how we want, and this is the type of people that we're going to hire, and here's what we're going to hire for, versus just let's throw a warm body in there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Even now, and it's harder to do right now, right? Because it feels like good talent is hard to find, and even available talent is hard to find. And to your point a moment ago about people panicking and starting to make sort of reactive decisions versus really kind of taking one step back and saying, not just what's the fastest decision to put out the fire, but what's the right one to move us closer to our goal. Organizations, leaders, sales leaders, et cetera, you have to start from that point of clarity of what are we in business to accomplish? What's a strategy that's going to get us there? What's kind of our 5-year outcome so we sort of know success when we see it? And what are we going to tolerate? And I know a lot of people think, okay, well, Claire's going to start talking about what's our value set. And that's like all this squishy stuff. And it's not real, it's not tangible. But if you aren't really clear about not just what you want to accomplish, but how you believe is the right way to get there, not just in terms of performance metrics, but in terms of how we will behave, how we will show up, how we will work together, how we will represent our brand. You're not going to know the right talent from the wrong one when you meet it, right? So it's just as important to have that clarity, not just around mission, but around what is the DNA, what is the stuff behaviorally, performance-wise, experience-wise, skill set-wise of our best performers in our culture. Not the rock stars of the industry, but the ones who have been successful here. What does that look like? And let's replicate that.
Light bulb moment for me. I hope for other people too. We're speaking with Claire Chandler, clairechandler.net. I'm coming back to this point of tolerate, Claire. I wanted to make a little distinction for people because sometimes people don't realize the difference between honesty and truthfulness.
Right. That's right.
So I look at it this way, a little story, two brothers have a fight, two young kids, right? They're having a fight. The oldest brother goes, the youngest one's, he's the one who started the fight. He hit me first, right? That type of thing. And the parents are like, why did you hit him? And he goes, because, he took my stuff, right? Right. And so turns out the older brother's been taking the little kid's stuff, and the little kid had enough and he retaliated. So the oldest brother says, it's honest. My little brother started the fight. But the truthful part is the older brother started the fight because the little one was defending himself to get his stuff back.
That's right.
So I want to go to this tolerate, because this is a part I see people like miss all the time. And they go, and look, let's just be, all of you listening who are going to write hate mail into Doug C. Brown, that's okay. But they,
at least they're listening.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. This is hard to do if you don't know how to do it, especially, right? And I see people, and everything's in real time. And, I know I've made hiring errors in the past. I'll probably make some in the future. But what I agree with you wholeheartedly, that we don't just look at the good side of this, but we also look at the toleration side, if you will. I'll call it that. And, how do you want people to behave within your organization? Because that is the representation that touches the senses of the buyer and your consistent buyers and your repeat buyers and everything that touches. It's the brand, really, when it comes down to it. I'll illustrate it by saying, we've all gone to an airline that we go, wow, that was an amazing flight because the person was so good to us on the plane. We've also been on an airline where, I don't know, TSA and the working people on the plane, they think it's a military academy or something, and they can become a drill sergeant, and they know they can get away with it, right? Because it's like, where are you going to go? You're in the plane.
I'm laughing because I just flew last week and I had that experience. I was saying, like, does anyone at TSA actually like their job or like dealing with people? Yeah.
Okay, so now you're going to get the hate mail from the TSA.
I know, it's fine.
but So it's so important. Jay Conrad Levinson, who wrote a book series called the Guerrilla Marketing Books, they're still out there today. He once told me something. I asked him, I said, Jay, what is marketing really? He says, everything that touches the senses of your potential buyer. Mm. And I really took that to heart to think about, okay, so the clothing I wear, how I wear my hair, how tightly I wear my hair, and and all of those things, in addition to my personality, in addition to the process, in addition to everything. How do we begin to understand how we want people to behave? Because I've seen people just miss this, and they've got the greatest product out there.
Yeah.
And I just called into customer service. They installed something in my home, and I was so happy with it. And I called into their customer service thing for one small point. I was like, hey, can I have somebody give me a call? And they pretty much hung up on me. They're like grumpy, and you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm questioning, wow, did I go to the right place?
Yeah.
Right. So how do we go about, picking the toleration points and how people behave, et cetera?
Yeah. So here's where they get it wrong. A lot of companies, and I'm sure a lot of your audience are listening to this and saying, okay, we've got that covered because we have a set of core values. We've got our mission. We know where we want to be in 5 years. The first time you allow someone to violate your value system and you don't call it out, sends a message to your workforce. It sends a message to your prospects. It sends a message to your clients. Every single person in your organization is an expression of your brand. Every single person. And again, especially the smaller companies that can't afford the impact of one bad hire or one bad investment or one delayed decision. Every single person out there, especially your sales team, are often the only ambassador of your brand that they come into contact with, or at least are the first one, right? So where leaders get this wrong is they do the groundwork of clarifying their mission. They do the groundwork of identifying this is our system of values, which are typically an expression of the founder's personality if it's a smaller company or a startup. And then they fall down on the job when they have to address bad behavior. Too often I have seen founders, I have seen executives of large organizations fool themselves, again, this sort of ostrich head in the sand mentality that, well, I've hired adults. They're going to figure out how to behave. And what they actually figure out is what's getting rewarded and what is being tolerated. Because if I'm working my butt off and I am living the values every single day and holding myself into account on days that I don't do that, and I'm working alongside someone who is equally compensated, is behaving poorly, is not giving their all, is misrepresenting, what a company can do to a client or a prospective client, and they are not handled, they are not addressed. And I'm not talking you have to fire somebody necessarily, but if you truly care about where you're going and what your people are doing in terms of representing your brand, then as a leader, it is incumbent upon you to call out bad behavior. It's been said, and I am going to forget the authors of this quote, but it has stuck with me for years, that your vision pulls you, your mission pushes you, and your values keep you from running off the road. And it is so true. You can have a compelling and aspirational vision. You can have a mission that people want to come on board and contribute to. But if you allow people to run roughshod over your values and you don't address it as a leader, it's a failure on you. It's not a failure on them.
Well, I've always felt adults really are just children in bigger bodies, right?
They really are. And here's the good thing about that. Because when we are you've used the word alignment, and I know that kind of has framed up the theme for our conversation. But when you are in alignment with what you're passionate about, what motivates you, and what comes naturally to you in terms of your core strengths, it is like being back in touch with that child within you, right? A good friend of mine and a business mentor uses the analogy of, your 5-year-old self playing with crayons. When you are completely aligned with what you do well in ways that motivate you, and in ways where you can sort of see a tangible connection between your individual contribution and that shared mission, it is like, letting your inner child play with their crayons, because it's not work. You're in a zone. You feel good about what you do. You feel fulfilled with the work that you put in. So there's a positive side to the, to that image of being a child in adult clothing. It's when those children, those inner children or our inner teenager act out. If we are not, the thing about parenting teenagers is you've got to give them boundaries. You've got to tell them what's allowed and what's not. Well, it's the same thing with managing, teenagers masquerading as adults. You've got to call them out on bad behavior. Otherwise, they're going to repeat it. And otherwise, the really good performers and the good behaviors are going to say, why am I expending all of this discretionary effort when it's not being noticed and that guy's getting rewarded just as much as I am?
I'll take this in second and third, the here, as they say in the thing. I'll illustrate it by a story. So that company I was telling you about that had the 82% turnover, the CEO wouldn't fire that person. They hired me in to create a process within the company to help them grow. So I said, hey, this person's got to go. We got to push them down the trough somewhere, put them on an island, right? Because sometimes that works as well. Wouldn't do it. I said, you're going to lose your team. And so wouldn't do it. The team started leaving. And he came back to me and said, I'm losing my top performers. I said, told you this is going to happen, right? I can get them back, but you got to get rid of this person because this is, he's being indignant and rude and your operations people are ready to, storm your office and you just don't realize it. Right. And he said, all right, you fire him. So I'm like, okay. So I did let him go. A week later, he hires him back. So I go fire him again. Less than a week later, he hires him back. I call him up. I go, what are you doing? He goes, he's my best buddy in the world. I said, he's going to cause your company to fail. I fired this man 3 times in 3.5 months. He hired him back 4 times. I said, I'm done, but I got your sales process done. Now they have grown from 50 million to over 60 million in this 4-month period because they just had a lot of stuff they were sitting on that they could monetize. Within the 12-month period of me leaving, they were $70 million company. 2 years to the day I left, they were a $110 million company. And the United States government came into that company and shut it down and fined this owner $120 million. And took every single bank account they had because this individual that I was telling you about was lying to people and taking and doing illegal things to get them to buy things, which the government caught hold of. And not only did one government agency came in, but all of them came in. And this person completely out of business after working at this company of his own for 8 years, right, to get it to this place. So I'm going to the extreme because I want people out there go, Claire saying this, Doug agreeing with that. Listen, I've seen it happen over and over and over. What is it? The third law of the universe, what you put in motion comes back or something like that, right?
Butterfly effect, I think. Yeah, something like that.
Is that what it's called? Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. So if you have somebody in there just causing havoc over and over and over and over and over, then it will come back in some time somehow and bite you as the owner of your company. So Claire, anything I should have asked that I didn't ask? That you were like, well, he should ask this question. But
it's such a loaded question, right?
There's 500 things, Doug, that you didn't have. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many rabbit holes we can go down, and your story exactly illustrates the point of the ripple effect of bad decisions or delayed decisions. And the one that really underscores is the one that I see time and time again with leaders, which is they don't make the difficult decision. Whether it's because they've hired their buddy and they're emotionally attached to him, or because they delude themselves into thinking that, well, my employees are adults and eventually they'll figure out how to behave properly. I several years ago, I fired a client because no matter how many times I counseled him about how to have the difficult conversation with a couple of his employees who were veering off the right road, he would commit to having the conversation and then he would always back away from it. And he never did it. Well, that company ultimately went out of business. Not to the scale of the one that you just described, but it is when a leader, again, can have absolute clarity about what they're all about and where they're going. But when they don't make the difficult decisions or have those crucial conversations, it doesn't matter how eloquent your mission is or how compelling it might be, your actions matter. And if there's a conflict between what you say and what you do, people are going to follow what you do.
Ooh, that's profound. I want to say that again. All right. So say it again, please.
If there's a disconnect between what you say you are all about, what you value, what you are in business to accomplish, and your actions day to day around, addressing poor behavior or poor performance or not giving clear expectations and all of that, if there is a disconnect between what you say and what you do, people are going to take notice and follow what you do, because that is really the more genuine expression of who you really are.
Wow. All right. Those of you who are parents.
Yeah. It's very similar, right? It really is. And I know some people go, oh, let's not start equating employees to children. But some of those same parenting best practices apply here. You have to model the behavior you want to see repeated. You have to give them the guardrails around what is acceptable and what is not. And you have to give them some level of freedom to express themselves in ways that bring them joy. You've forgotten who I'm talking about, right? Employees or children, but those precepts are pretty universal.
I love that. I was just talking with somebody that was saying, my son's so much like his father, right? It's like, I'm like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He's so much like his father. I'm like, okay, I'm not leaving this alone. Claire, I want to ask one other question.
Yeah.
Leaders, I see this happen, and I think it's a mistake. And I explain this to owners and CEOs. They have to keep growing themselves in order for their organization to grow. And I'm talking about not only professionally, but personally. We have to grow. And I've always found that the best parents in the world are the ones that challenge all the junk that had them held up their life and show their children that, hey, I did this. And, when you get there, you can do this too, if you ever get there. Yeah. I find that for some reason, business owners, CEOs, they get to a certain place on that, we hit that clarity level, right? But they don't continue to keep growing beyond that, not necessarily even on the revenue so much or the profitability of the company, but just the growth of the people within the organization because they're not growing themselves. Do you see that as a commonplace thing? And if so, how does somebody not do that? Because I see companies sort of wither from the interior.
Yeah, I have seen that. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think a lot of leaders do hit an upper limit if they don't deal with their past baggage. And that could be, so I mentioned this leader who went out of business after he didn't really follow through on these difficult conversations. Part of that was because he had baggage from a previous startup company that had failed. And he was extremely bitter because he had started it with partners and he felt that they kind of did him dirty, right? So he kind of came into this new startup setting to prove them wrong. Oh. And he reached an upper limit in terms of how well he could grow. And I think so many leaders struggle with that. Now, I happen to, do executive coaching as part of my business, but even if I didn't, I'm a strong advocate in working with the right coach. I have had the good fortune of working with a couple of really good business coaches that I thought I was going to them to help me with the sales side of my business. Because as I mentioned earlier, I do that on my own. But what I really got from them is working through some of that head junk that we bring into our business, that we don't know how to lay down and let go of because we don't even realize anymore that we're dragging it around. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but I very much see a lot of leaders get stunted in their growth when they don't deal with that head junk. And let me be the first to tell your audience, It is the very rare evolved leader who can do that on their own. That is not an advertisement for me specifically. It's for anybody who is not working with someone through their head junk. It is not fluffy stuff. That is really where, when I worked through that with my coaches and business mentors, that's when my business really took off, because it was through that. It wasn't the tactics. It was through getting clear about what was serving me and what was no longer doing that.
Well said. And it's okay if you softly promoted what you were doing. That is fine too.
It was not my intention.
That's funny. Claire, on that note, how do people get a hold of you if they want to?
Yeah. So fastest way is to go to my website, which you have very kindly stated a couple of times, is clairechandler.net. And as far as social media, LinkedIn is where I hang out quite a bit. So they can reach out there and send a note and say hi.
Do you know the handle? If not, we'll put it in the notes.
I don't. It has something with my name, but there's like an extension. I'll send it to you.
Thanks. I always ask that question because for about, I don't know, up until about 5-6 weeks ago, I didn't know my handle. I kept, and so both my daughters work in the company, and they're like, Dad, it's Doug Brown 123. You can't remember Doug Brown 123, like. So, anyways, so thanks for being here, Claire. I really appreciate this because I know people got a lot out of this. I got a lot out of it myself, and I love when people come here and we just play full out, because that's what this is all about. So, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I've loved our conversation.
Mission, vision, values. I love that part of our conversation because it tells you where to go, where to push, where not to push. And your values do keep you on the rails, as she said, right? Because if your company's not working from a values-based place, selling on value is the quickest way to higher profitability than anything else. But if your values aren't aligned, you're not going to be able to sell congruently or as a team, right? And we're talking about team performance. I love the fact about we should compensate, or at least part of the compensation should be on team performance when we're trying to get a team to actually come in alignment with what we're doing, what we want to do, where we want our values to be, where we want the activity to be, right? So it's one of those things that, monetary contribution normally will make people pay attention, right? So the old saying, hey, if you want somebody to pay attention, pay them, when they pay attention. So when you pay, they also will pay attention. As long as you have that compensation plan aligned with what you're looking to do, getting massive clarity in the beginning of that. Again, not honesty, truth. Honesty, subjective. I think this is what I think. Truth, let's measure it objectively. A lot of the lessons that Claire had been conveying in this, I'm going to say it this way, all the lessons are applicable. A lot of these lessons are critical to your success based on what I know from running high-performance sales teams, building high-performing sales teams, and managing these high-performing sales teams over my life. There is a process of success. There is a pathway to success. If you don't know what that is, reach out to Claire, reach out to myself. And that type of thing is a learned skill. And I also love the fact that she brought in at the end, we as leaders, we as owners, we got to get rid of, I think she called it her head baggage, the trash in our head, the non-serving habits or the non-serving thoughts that have developed into habits, because those are impedances in our own life, not only in our business, but they'll show up in our personal life, but they'll definitely transcend through the team, right? And people will do what you do more than they will do what you say, especially if you're constantly or consistently, I should say, doing over and over and over, but you're saying something that's incongruent. They will follow what you do. All right. With that being said, if you love this show, please go up and give it a 5-star review. If you agree with the points, don't agree with the points, share the love on email. Send it to YouMatter, YOUMATTER. Say, hey, I love this. I didn't like that. Give us feedback. It's good with us. If you are an expert or you know someone who's an expert and you have a subject matter that you want brought forth, whether you do it or someone else does it, introduce us at the same email address. Let us know what you're thinking about. We respond to all incoming inquiries. And we'll let you know, can we do a show about it? If it aligns up with the CEO Sales Strategies, mission, values, and brand, if you will, or she said the mission, vision, and values, then we will do the show on that. All right. With that being said, go out and sell something. Sell a lot of it, right? Play, win, win. That means they win, you win. Be the first to disengage if it's not right for them or it's not right for you. There are no bad clients. There are just bad business decisions on the sales side that bring forth a mismatch between the client and the actual deliverer of the client need, if you will, i.e. you, right? If you or someone you know wants to be in the top 1% of earners in selling, through selling, whether you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, you're a coach, consultant, trainer, whether you own a company and have a full team of people, whether you're just involved in something to do with selling and you want to get better at that and get yourself to the top 1% earners, reach out to us. In fact, reach out to me directly at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. We are launching off our 1% Academy coming up in this year. And if you'd like to get on the waiting list, let us know. You can also reach out to me at Doug Brown 123 because I remember it now. All right, guys, again, go out, make someone happy, sell a lot of stuff, sell it profitably and to your success.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. What is something that you learned that you could act on today? Don't forget to schedule it now, or it may never get forward momentum. If you find our content valuable, please leave a favorable review and let us know what you liked. Please also share this with others if the content will help them. For our show notes, other episodes, and more interesting content and resources, please visit ceosalesstrategiespodcast.com. See you soon, and to your continued success,